We're stuck on a different planet. We're stuck on a different planet. Xenoblade Chronicles X is coming to Nintendo Switch. After a decade of being a Nintendo Wii U exclusive, one of the most famous titles on the console is now being ported over, possibly to build up to a sequel. I know like the developers have come out and spoken out against the idea that they're not going to produce a sequel, but these are the same people who openly said that Xenoblade Chronicles 2 would have nothing to do with Xenoblade Chronicles 1, which of course was a complete and total lie. I think they said something along the lines of like it takes place in a different universe, which is true, but yeah, they do tie into each other's at the end, and 3 is all about that. So I would not be surprised if Xenoblade Chronicles X2 is now in production, which is very, very exciting to see, considering Xenoblade Chronicles X is still my favorite Xenoblade game. I do think when it comes to like the open world design, when it comes to like the really complex RPG mechanics, when it comes to the scales and like that series progression, X in a lot of ways is completely unmatched. Not only in regards to like the typical Xenoblade formula, but I think as RPGs as a whole, right? X in a lot of ways is what something like Baldur's Gate 3 or Skyrim wishes it could be, with its wide open area, with tons of unique ecosystems and creatures to find and exploit, right? All this crazy progression. Like X is like basically a single player MMO, right? And um that is a good and a bad thing, right? As much as I liked X, as much as I liked it like as an improvement over the original, it does have a lot of really glaring issues with like the story and like the text boxes are too small. And you know, it's still a Xenoblade game, right? Like it is way too grindy for what it is. I It's still my favorite of the four so far, but I do think there is something to be said about just the nature of the gameplay in and of itself. How it just feels too monotonous. Like you either love it or you don't, basically. And for me, the story taking a backseat in Xenoblade Chronicles X was an improvement because my big glaring issue with the Xenoblade game so far is that the writing is not very good. People love to cope and seethe about it. They'd like to blame the translation, but I think at its core, Xenoblade games do not have good stories. So again, that's having less of a story in X's was a huge improvement over the original, I think, and a huge, huge thing like over two, I think. It's very exciting to see the game be ported over, but of course, you have certain individuals in the community just coming out of the woodwork to whine and complain about it. Because Xenoblade Chronicles X is the Wii U game that was hit the hardest with censorship allegations. It's really difficult to wrap your mind around this today, considering like where we're at today and seeing like where the rest of the industry is, like putting out stuff like Dragon Age Veilguard and stuff like that. But like back in the day, 10 years ago, people genuinely thought that Xenoblade Chronicles X was some huge, abhorrent, like censored mess. Which of course is absurd because all that essentially amounted to was a couple of costume changes, some dialogue, some line changes, and some changed costumes. Right? There was nothing censored in Xenoblade Chronicles X, and yet when the re-release is announced, all anybody can talk about, all anybody on 4chan can do is try and damage control this by trying to create this narrative that the game is going to be more censored than ever. Like, let alone the fact that nobody really cares. Like, let alone the fact that none of the changes really amounted to much, and that the game is going to do better on Switch than they did on Wii U. That Xenoblade Chronicles 2 came out after X and was extremely fan servicey, right? Like again, we have to keep up this narrative. We have to keep up this facade that Nintendo of America is actively out censoring Japanese games and removing all sexualized aspects from them. Okay, even though they're putting out like Fire Emblem games and all this other crap, like they should have hentai games on the eShop, right? Like again, like they have to keep up the illusion that Nintendo is the most censorship happy company in the industry, even though that is not and never has been true. In a lot of ways, Xenoblade Chronicles X was like the end of an era because this was the last time in which people could seriously come out and blame Nintendo for changes made in localizations, right? Like they can't just come out and say Nintendo is the worst anymore. Like I remember when Dragon Quest 8 came out on 3DS, and people tried to pretend that it was Nintendo responsible for those changes, even though it was a Square Enix game. Nintendo did not publish Dragon Quest 8 on 3DS, right? So like the this is a really interesting thing to see prop up because there definitely is this really really weird like obsessive culture online like trying to act as if like Japanese devs are just looking for an excuse to censor things and that things are going to be ruined in localization when in reality not it just isn't happening, right? Like whenever you see someone cope and seethe about like a ruined like look like gay like about localization, usually they're exaggerating to a point where it just really isn't worth taking seriously at all, right? Like you can see this a lot in regards to just the complaint just of just how they're acting about this, about how they're freaking out about this. uh it's just them reaching to try and find something to complain about. I really can't emphasize this enough. As someone who's tangentially associated with Xenoblade and the community, like I don't feel as if the people complaining about the changes are really fans of the series or Nintendo at all, right? If anything, I feel the exact opposite. That the people complaining about this are people who don't own a Switch, who have no intention of playing Xenoblade, no who know nothing about the series in general. Like again, most of them I'm sure just pirate the game like 5, 6 years later. Like that's the kind of audience we're dealing with here. Like these people really have no bearing on the way these games are viewed or received at all. And I think it's really telling, looking at the announcement video, like when you see the comment section and see just how many people are glowing, just really happy about this. When you see the wider Xenoblade community, right, celebrating this. When you see like Nintendo fans talking about this, right? When you see like all this real positive excitement about this major new release, Nintendo Switch release in 2025, the Pretendos online who are desperately trying to steer the conversation towards censorship are completely and utterly going to get BTFO. It is going to be crazy seeing these people just cope and seethe about about X being successful. And I do think this needs to be said about like all of these Nintendo games, right? This isn't Nintendo games can't really bomb anymore, right? There's no chance of like the company going under or these games doing so badly that like they don't get sequels, right? What we're seeing today is just Nintendo is so utterly dominant in gaming that yes, I do feel confident in saying Xenoblade X is going to get a sequel. I do feel confident saying Advance Wars is coming back, that F-Zero is coming back, that Star Fox is coming back, right? These games are going to be on the eShop forever for anyone to download and buy and enjoy, right? And of course, you have all the other games in the series. You have all this real like enthusiasm. People will be discovering these games forever. We don't have this artificial barrier of entry where people just aren't able to get their hands on the game, or it takes a little bit too much effort. Like it is it's going to be very, 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 very difficult to downplay Xenoblade Chronicles X after it releases on Switch in March. Okay, this is going to be a game that is going to long see its overdue. The game is 10 years old. Okay, and yet it's still somehow more more amazing and more well put together and better thought out and more respected than games that got a lot more attention 10 years ago. You know, stuff like Dragon Age Inquisition, stuff like Dark Souls 2, stuff like Killzone Shadowfall. Like, all of those games have fallen into obscurity and that nobody cares about them anymore. But Xenoblade Chronicles X is the one that has remained very relevant and very popular because, like all Nintendo games, it's simply better than the competition.